now I'll focus entirely on what the United States created as an imperial system after World War II. In the closing years in 1944 and 45, the first thing the Americans wanted to do to create a post-war world was to break up the British Empire. And you did this by making a loan to Britain that was broke from the war. Many of its men had died, and there were many more women than men, which helped make it more socialist at the time. And Britain desperately needed a loan. So the Americans said, okay, we'll lend you the money so that you won't starve, but you have to make, there's some conditions for it. You're going to break up your sterling area. You can't have, that's protectionist. We want free trade, meaning we want access to your sterling area. We want India and Australia, Canada, and other countries in the sterling area to be able to buy American goods and to let American companies come in. Essentially, America wanted to replace Britain, the same as it wanted to replace France. So Britain had to not use its sterling area balances to buy its goods. The sterling area ended up as a arm of the American empire. Now, also, the United States created two post-war vehicles that have done everything they can to destroy the world economy and which must be ended for other countries to progress. And these two vehicles are the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And they were created to open up trade and financial markets, to essentially let US investors buy control of foreign natural resources and industry, and to lock in foreign dependency on the United States. The World Bank makes loans to governments to create export infrastructure, to buy US and European technology, build dams, build roads, and not to be self-sufficient in their own food. They're supposed to shift, the World Bank finances Latin America, Africa, and Near Eastern agriculture to produce export crops that do not compete with American grain exports. So the idea is to make other countries dovetail into the American economy by being dependent on the US economy. Well, the result of following the World Bank advice is to run a deepening trade deficit and a balance of payments deficit. And then the International Monetary Fund comes in and said, well, we'll lend you the money so that, your currency doesn't collapse, but you have to agree to do certain things. We want a free market. A free market means you prevent labor unions. You have to either jail or preferably kill all the labor union leaders. You have to lower the minimum wage. You have to devalue currency, and we'll protect the rich people, because just before you collapse, we'll lend enough money for you to support the currency so all of your wealthy oligarchs can move their money out of Brazil or out of Argentina at a high exchange rate. Then we'll let it all collapse. And once they've got their money into dollars, we'll let the currency collapse. And what that really does is devalue the price of labor. So the IMF plan for stability is to lower the price of labor steadily and steadily and steadily. And the final arm of this is the U.S. Agency for International Development, meaning the Agency for International Backwardness. And its job is to finance assassination programs and terrorism throughout the world. And I'm going to go through this later. And then finally, America creates military alliances like NATO and SEATO, the Near Eastern, with Turkey and Near Eastern countries, to co-opt them into reliance on America's military exports. The heads of the World Bank, the most noteworthy heads, have all been military leaders. The most noteworthy were Assistant Secretary of War John McCloy, the first major president of the World Bank, 1947 to 49. I'm sure you all know John McNamara, the Secretary of Defense. He was the World Bank president during 1968 to 81. And then the most bellicose World Bank president is Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz in 2005 to 2007. Now, already in April of 1992, when he was Undersecretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, Wolfowitz and Louis Scooter Libby presented a memorandum to the Defense Planning Committee for 1990, how America was going to organize the world militarily, 1994 to 99. And he asserted, quote, "We must maintain the mechanism for deterring potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global war role." This was a declaration of war. US officials demanded total command, and announcing that they felt threatened if they could not control the politics and domestic economic policy of other countries. They felt threatened that these countries might keep their wealth at home and that the American economy would collapse. So they said, we have to control them. Our wealth depends upon keeping other countries poor. That's all written in to the official American foreign policy. And the major lever of imposing this conquest is financial. The IMF, as I said, it finances client oligarchies. The IMF will lend money to political allies such as Ukraine, even when the money's stolen by Ukrainian oligarchs, but it will withhold credit from countries that America wants to overthrow. So America can use the International Monetary Fund to essentially, Wall Street can do a currency raid on an unfriendly country, meaning a country wanting to be independent, and the IMF will then bail it out once it turns pro-American, and the IMF will say, you see, that's the free market. You'll get rich when you support America, or at least, but you'll get, if you don't get rich, at least you'll get poor and to be devastated if you don't have an American proxy government in place. So the idea is not really to create competition in a market, it's to prevent competition. Countries are told to sell off their public enterprises in order to raise the money to pay the money they owe the IMF. And so the World Bank and the IMF and US foreign aid are all used to make foreign countries follow policies that are deemed to be in the US interest. So basically, to finance their trade deficits and remit profits to the U.S., governments go further and further into debt to the IMF to subsidize their deficits that come from financial looting of their economies by the American dollar standard. So in the language of international diplomacy, the word democracy has become disconnected from what it used to mean politically. It used to mean rule by the people, the demos. But now the democracy means a pro-American country. Democracy means mainly you're a military dictatorship like Pinochet in Chile, or coup d'etat leader, as in Brazil. Democracy, essentially pro-American oligarchy. And if a country tries to be democratic, it's called communist. Sometimes only socialist, but any country wanting democracy today is accused of being communist, socialist, or Marxist. That's a pretty good compliment for Marxism and socialism. Under Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, America was still anti-colonialist because it wanted to break up the British Empire. But things changed in 1963 when Eisenhower became president, Republican, and brought in probably the two most evil characters in 20th century American history, the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles is Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles is head of the CIA. And their program was, if someone wants to be socialist, if someone does not want to let American companies buy them out, they must be assassinated. The Dulles' principle is you cannot negotiate with someone who wants to be independent. You must not only kill them, but overthrow the regime and declare their country an enemy. Now, the first major intervention to block foreign self-determination occurred in Iran. Mohammad Mossadegh had been elected prime minister in 1951 on a program of promising land reform and a land tax and to gain control of Iran's natural oil resources from Anglo-Persian oil. It's now called British Petroleum. The Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the company because it was paying less than 20% of its profits in taxes, and the profits were kept low by clever accounting. In America, we call that Hollywood accounting, that made it appear as if they weren't earning anything on this oil. And the company had promised to build hospitals and schools and raise wages, and it broke all of its commitments that it promised, so it defaulted on the contract. Now, Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee in Britain, it was British Petroleum, asked Truman to overthrow Mossadegh. And Truman and his department said, no, nationalists are a bulwark against communism and against the Communist Tudeh party in Iran. But when Eisenhower came in, they said, no, nationalism and self-determination is communism. They're the same. If they're nationalists, they're against this, just as communists are against this. And anyone who's not pro-American is, by definition, a communist. So they arranged with Britain's MI6 to organize a coup d'etat, led by Kermit Roosevelt, to impose the Shah is a dictator on Iran. And we all know what happened. The Shah imposed a vicious dictatorship for many decades. Mossadegh, the prime minister, was imprisoned in his own house. They wouldn't let him leave. And when he eventually died, he was buried in his own house just to prevent a public demonstration saying, we want to restore democracy. Americans said, you cannot have democracy abroad. Democracy is communism and Marxism.